He set it across his own dining table, the polished mahogany surface reflecting the cold light from the chandelier. "Mama, be reasonable. We can't keep feeding you." The words hung in the air between us, thicker than the scent of Marcia's over-sweetened apple crumble. My son Darnell looked at me with an expression of strained patience, the kind a man reserves for a problem he believes is beneath him, but is nonetheless required to solve. I felt the smooth, heavy weight of my water glass in my hand, the condensation cold against my skin. I did not move. I did not speak. I simply watched him, and in that quiet moment I understood that the son I had raised was a stranger, and the woman he saw sitting before him was a ghost of his own making. The wire for the $50 million sale of my company had cleared that very morning. The story he was telling himself and trying to tell me had begun months earlier. It started after my husband Robert passed. The house on Sugar Hill, once filled with the sound of his booming laugh and the smell of his pipe tobacco, fell silent. The silence was a physical thing, a weight that settled in the rooms and pressed on my chest. For 38 years, Robert and I had built Banks Linen Services from a single washing machine in our garage into the premier hospital and hotel linen supplier in the state of Georgia. We'd worked side by side, him handling the contracts and the handshakes, me managing the logistics and the books. The business was our second child, the one that never talked back. After the funeral, after the last casserole dish was returned and the sympathy cards stopped arriving, the silence became unbearable. I retreated. Not into despair, exactly, but into a quiet space of my own. I spent my days in the sunroom, listening to Gladys Knight on the record player, watching the light move across the Persian rug. Grief makes you selfish with your time. It demands solitude. I had spent nearly 4 decades building an empire. I felt I had earned the right to sit with my memories of the man who had laid the foundation with me. Darnell and his wife, Marcia, saw it differently. They saw neglect. They saw a woman letting herself go. Their visits became more frequent, their tones more condescending. Marcia would rearrange the throw pillows on the sofa, her lips pursed in disapproval at a fleck of dust on the mantelpiece. Darnell would stand in the doorway of the sunroom, his hands on his hips. "You been in here all day, Mama?" he'd ask, his voice a little too loud, as if I'd lost my hearing along with my husband. "I have," I would reply, not looking up from my book. "You need to get out. Get some air. It's not healthy, sitting in here like this." They mistook my quiet for weakness, my stillness for decay. They had no frame of reference for a woman who was not in constant motion, serving, managing, producing. In their world, a woman at rest was a woman in decline. During this time, I was also in the final, delicate stages of negotiating the sale of Banks Linen. It was a process that required absolute discretion and immense focus. My corporate counsel, Beverly Strode, and I had been working on it for nearly a year. The calls were constant, the documents voluminous. My quiet days were filled with conference calls and financial projections, work I did from the antique secretary desk in my bedroom, the doors closed. Darnell and Marcia saw only the closed doors. They drew their own conclusions. The week it all came to a head began with a Sunday dinner at their house in Dunwoody. Marcia had made what she called a healthy version of smothered pork chops, which meant they were dry and joyless. The house was immaculate, all cool grays and sharp angles, a place that looked like it was staged for a magazine not lived in. Their 2 children, my grandchildren, were polite and distant, their faces buried in glowing screens in another room. We sat at the long dining table, the 3 of us. Darnell cleared his throat after pushing a piece of caul around his plate. "Mama," he began, placing his fork down with an air of finality. "Marcia and I have been talking." Marcia reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. Her skin was cool, her grip surprisingly firm. "Cleo, we're worried about you. You're all alone in that big house. You're not eating right. You seem so withdrawn." I looked from her face to Darnell's. They had rehearsed this. Their expressions were synchronized, a duet of practiced concern. "I'm grieving, Marcia," I said quietly. "It takes time." "We know, honey, we know," she said, patting my hand. "But it's been 6 months. We think it's time to start thinking about the next step, for your own good." Darnell leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "What we're proposing, Mama, is that you come live with us. We've got the guest suite downstairs. It's got its own bathroom. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. Marcia can cook for you. Make sure you're taking your pills. We can handle all the bills, the upkeep on the house. You can just rest." The offer was presented as a gift, a soft landing, but the words he used, handle, take care of, worry about, they felt like the bars of a cage being lowered into place. The house on Sugar Hill wasn't just a house. It was the physical manifestation of a lifetime of work. Robert and I had bought it when Darnell was 5, a grand old brownstone that had seen better days. We restored it ourselves, board by board. Every floorboard held a memory. The idea of leaving it, of being handled in a sterile guest room, made my throat tighten. "That's a very generous offer, Darnell," I said, carefully pulling my hand from under Marcia's. "But I'm perfectly capable of managing on my own." "But are you?" he pressed, his voice losing its gentle edge. "Last week when I came by, the mail was still in the box at 2 in the afternoon. You forgot about your dentist appointment last month. These are signs, Mama." I had not forgotten the appointment. I had rescheduled it to accommodate a call with the buyer's legal team. The mail was in the box because I had been on the phone with Beverly, finalizing the closing documents. But I said none of this. It was not his business. The sale was my affair, a final act of stewardship for the legacy Robert and I had built. I had not told Darnell about it for a reason. He had a tendency to see my money as his own future inheritance, a resource to be tapped. He had started his sports agency with a significant loan from us, a loan I had never asked him to repay. Apparently, ambition works both ways. "I'm fine, Darnell," I said, my voice firm. His jaw tightened. "We don't think you are, and we're your family. It's our job to step in when you can't take care of yourself." And that was when he said it. His frustration finally boiled over, stripping away the thin veneer of concern. He sighed, a long, put-upon sound. "Mama, be reasonable. We can't keep feeding you." The line was absurd. I had not taken a dime from my son since he was a teenager. I paid for my own groceries, my own utilities, my own life. The phrase wasn't about food. It was about burden. He was telling me I had become a weight, a responsibility he was tired of carrying in his mind. The irony was so bitter, it almost made me laugh. That morning, I had signed the final papers that made me one of the wealthiest women in Atlanta. And that evening, my only son was telling me I was a charity case. I drove home from that dinner with a cold knot in my stomach. The house felt different when I walked in. The silence I had once found comfort in now felt menacing. I saw my home through their eyes, too big, too quiet, the home of a woman who was fading. I walked through the rooms, running my hand along the back of Robert's favorite armchair, tracing the patterns in the wallpaper we'd hung together. I had built a life of substance and meaning. How had my own son missed it entirely? The next day, Darnell came by. He was carrying a briefcase and wearing a suit, his important businessman costume. He said he was on his way to a client meeting but wanted to drop off a coat he'd left at my house a few weeks prior. It was a lie, and we both knew it. He had never left a coat here. He was checking on me, assessing my state of mind after our conversation. "Just wanted to see how you were doing, Mama," he said, standing in the foyer, refusing to come in further. "I'm the same as I was yesterday, Darnell." "Did you think any more about our offer?" "I did, and the answer is still no. This is my home." He sighed again, that same theatrical sound of a man burdened by an unreasonable parent. "We're just trying to help. You're being stubborn." He glanced at his watch. "Look, I've got to run. Think about it, okay? We'll talk more this week." He turned and left. His actual coat, A heavy wool overcoat was slung over the banister where he'd tossed it upon arriving. He had forgotten it in his haste to perform his role as the concerned son. I picked it up to hang it in the closet. It felt heavier than it should. I felt a thick sheaf of papers in the inside pocket. Curiosity is a powerful thing. I told myself I was just moving them so they wouldn't get wrinkled. I pulled out the folded documents. The top page was a form, a legal form. My eyes scanned the header. Petition for appointment of conservator. My breath caught in my chest. I unfolded the pages, my hands beginning to tremble. It was a draft, not yet filed, but meticulously filled out. My name was listed as the proposed ward. Darnell's name was listed as the petitioner. I read through the justifications, the carefully constructed narrative of my decline. Lethargy and withdrawal from social activities. Inability to manage daily financial affairs. Neglect of personal and household responsibilities. It even mentioned the missed dentist appointment. It cited a cognitive evaluation recommended by my physician, Dr. Yancey, a complete and utter fabrication. I sank onto the bottom step of the staircase, the heavy coat sliding to the floor beside me. The cold from the marble seeped through my clothes. This wasn't just a misguided attempt to help. This was a plan, a calculated legal maneuver to strip me of my autonomy, my home, my life's work. He wasn't trying to get me to move into his guest room. He was trying to take possession of my house, my assets, my pension, he must have thought. He had no idea about the company. He saw a grieving widow with a modest pension and a valuable piece of property on Sugar Hill. He saw an opportunity. The air in the foyer grew thin. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me, the kind of clarity that comes after the initial shock has passed. The grief that had clouded my world for months began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard anger. He had mistaken my mourning for incompetence. It was a profound, and soon to be, a very expensive miscalculation. I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and picked up the phone. My first call was to Dr. Yancey. His receptionist, a kind woman named Brenda, who I'd known for 20 years, put me right through. "Cleo, how are you doing?" Dr. Yancey's voice was warm, a familiar comfort. He had been my doctor, and Robert's for decades. "I'm well, David, thank you for asking," I said, keeping my voice even. "I have a strange question for you." "Ask away." "Has my son, Darnell, been in contact with your office recently? Regarding my health?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint rustle of papers. "Darnell? No, I haven't spoken to him in... Well, it must have been before Robert's services. He called to check on funeral arrangements, I believe. Why do you ask?" "He seems to be under the impression that you recommended I undergo a cognitive evaluation." The silence on the line was longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its casual warmth and taken on a sharp, professional edge. "Cleo, I have never at any point suggested such a thing. Your cognitive health is excellent. We did a full workup at your physical 3 months ago. You're sharp as a tack, and your charts reflect that. Has Darnell said otherwise?" "He's put it in writing," I said, my voice flat. "I see," Dr. Yancey said slowly. The implication was clear to him. "Cleo, is there something going on that you need to tell me about? From a medical legal standpoint, for one family member to claim a physician recommended something of that nature without it being true, that's a very serious matter." "I believe it is," I said. "David, would you be willing to state that officially if it becomes necessary?" "Without a moment's hesitation," he replied firmly. "My records are clear and my opinion is unequivocal. You are as competent as any patient I have. If your son is claiming otherwise, he is not telling the truth." I thanked him and hung up. The first pillar of Darnell's fabricated case had crumbled. I felt a small, grim satisfaction. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, the unsigned petition lying next to my teacup. The betrayal was a physical ache in my chest, a deep, resonant pain that eclipsed the grief I had been nursing for months. Robert would have been heartbroken. He had adored his son, had seen him as the inheritor of all our hard work, a prince in waiting. He would never have believed Darnell capable of such a thing. But Robert had always seen the best in people. I had been the one who read the fine print. My laptop was on the counter. I opened it, my fingers moving stiffly over the keys. There was an email from Beverly Strode, my lawyer. It had arrived an hour earlier. The subject line was simple: confirmation. I clicked it open. The body of the email was brief and professional. Dear Cleo, please see the attached wire confirmation. The funds from the sale of Banks Linen Services have been successfully deposited into your designated account as of 9:15 a.m. this morning. The transaction is complete. Congratulations. It has been an honor to represent you in this historic sale. Best, Beverly Strode. I downloaded the attachment. There it was, on the bank's official letterhead. A series of numbers that seemed to stretch on forever, followed by a decimal point and 2 zeros. $50 million. I stared at the two documents side by side on my kitchen table. On the left, a legal petition designed to declare me unfit to manage my own affairs, based on the assumption that I was a lonely old woman with nothing but a house and a small pension. On the right, a bank statement confirming that I was now in control of a fortune that my son couldn't even begin to imagine. The contrast was staggering. The phone rang, startling me. It was Darnell. "Hey, Mama," he said, his voice bright and casual. "Just checking in. Listen, Marcia and I were thinking, why don't you come over for dessert on Wednesday night? Marcia's making her famous red velvet cake. We need to talk more about this plan. Finalize things." Finalize things. The words sent a chill down my spine. They were planning to file the petition soon. They wanted me there, on their turf, to pressure me one last time, to get me to agree to their terms before they forced them upon me. They wanted me to walk willingly into the cage. "Wednesday sounds fine, Darnell," I said, my voice as smooth as glass. "What time?" "Great, say 7:30. We'll have coffee ready." "I'll be there," I said, and hung up the phone. I then made my second call to Beverly. I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Beverly, it's Cleo Banks." "Cleo, congratulations again. I trust you saw my email?" Her voice was crisp and efficient, the voice of a woman who had guided me through complex negotiations for 22 years. "I did. Thank you, Beverly, for everything. But we have a new situation." I calmly laid out the events of the last 2 days: the dinner, the conversation, the coat, the petition. I read her the specific claims, including the lie about Dr. Yancey. I told her about Darnell's invitation for Wednesday. She was silent for a full 10 seconds after I finished. When she spoke, all warmth was gone from her voice. It was pure, cold steel. "The arrogant little fool," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "He's not just insulting you, Cleo, he's committing fraud. Falsifying a physician's recommendation on a legal document is grounds for sanctions, at the very least." "What do I do, Beverly?" "You do exactly what he wants," she said, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her sharp legal mind. "You go to his house on Wednesday, you let him make his pitch, and you bring a few documents of your own. I'll draft a letter for you. It will outline, in no uncertain terms, the legal consequences of filing that petition. It will mention Dr. Yancey's sworn testimony, and it will make it very clear that any further action will be met with the most aggressive legal response my firm can muster. We will not only have the petition thrown out, we will countersue for legal fees and emotional distress. We will ruin him." "I don't want to ruin him, Beverly," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "He's my son." "He stopped being your son when he drafted a legal document to have you declared incompetent for his own financial gain," she shot back. "He is now a legal adversary, and you will treat him as such. Do you understand me, Cleo?" "I understand." "Good. I'll have a courier bring the letter to your house tomorrow, along with a certified copy of the wire confirmation. You bring those two things, and you bring that petition draft he so carelessly left behind. Let him say his piece, then you say yours. Quietly. Let the paper do the shouting. After I hung up with Beverly, I felt a profound sense of exhaustion. The battle lines were drawn and the strategy was set, but there was no joy in it, only a deep, hollow sadness. I had one more call to make. My goddaughter, Camille, was a forensic accountant in Chicago. She was sharp, discreet, and she loved me like a daughter of her own. "Auntie Cleo!" Her voice was a welcome burst of warmth. "I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up?" "I'm managing, sweetie. Listen, I need your professional brain for a moment if you have the time." "For you, always. What's going on?" I gave her the abbreviated version, focusing on the financial assumptions Darnell seemed to be making. I didn't tell her about the $50 million. It wasn't necessary. "So he thinks you're living on a fixed income, essentially," she clarified. "That seems to be the narrative," I said. "And this sports agency of his, Uncle Robert helped him start that up, right?" "He did. We gave him the seed money, a very generous amount." "Has he ever mentioned any trouble with it?" she asked, her accountant's mind already searching for patterns. "Any clients leave? Any financial strain?" A vague memory surfaced. A few months ago, Darnell had been complaining about a young basketball player he represented. The player had fired him and signed with a bigger agency. Darnell had been furious, muttering something about clawbacks and money he'd advanced the player. At the time, I dismissed it as the usual drama of his profession. "He mentioned something about a client clawback a while back," I said. Camille went quiet for a moment. "Auntie, that can be serious. If an agent advances money to a client for training, living expenses, whatever, and then gets fired, the agency might have to eat that cost. If the client was a big earner, that could be a significant hole in Darnell's books. Hundreds of thousands, maybe more." "I see," I said slowly, and suddenly I did. It wasn't just about the house. He was in financial trouble, deep trouble. He saw my assets, what he perceived as my modest, manageable assets, as his lifeline. The house could be leveraged. A conservatorship would give him the power to do it. It was all so much uglier, so much more desperate than I had imagined. Grief makes people very easy to persuade, and debt makes them very persuasive. "Can you look into it, Camille?" I asked, discreetly. "Consider it done, Auntie. I'll see what public records and industry chatter can tell me. You just take care of yourself, and don't you sign a single thing." "Don't worry," I said, looking at the documents on my table. "I won't." The next 2 days passed in a strange haze. I moved through my house, my home, feeling like a visitor. I packed a small overnight bag just in case. I didn't know what would happen on Wednesday, but I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep under Darnell's roof. I wouldn't be able to sleep under my own if he still had a key. The courier from Beverly's firm arrived on Tuesday afternoon, a young man in a crisp uniform who handed me a thick, important-feeling envelope. I laid the new documents next to the others on the kitchen table. The petition, the wire confirmation, the lawyer's letter, my entire case, laid out in black and white. Wednesday evening, I dressed carefully. I chose a simple navy blue dress, the one I wore to church board meetings. I wore my mother's pearls. I wanted to look composed, respectable. The woman they were describing in their petition, a confused, neglected elderly woman, would not exist in that room. I drove to their house, the envelope with the documents on the passenger seat beside me. As I pulled into their driveway, I saw that the lights were on in every window. They were preparing the stage. I took a deep breath, picked up my purse and the envelope, and walked to the front door. Marcia opened it before I could ring the bell. She was wearing a soft cashmere sweater and a strained smile. "Cleo, come in, come in. You're right on time." She led me to the living room. Darnell was there, standing by the fireplace. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand. He, too, was dressed for a performance, in a blazer and pressed trousers. "Mama," he said, walking over to kiss my cheek. His skin was cool. "Glad you could make it. Can I get you something to drink? Wine? Water? Water would be lovely, thank you, Darnell. As he went to the kitchen, Marcia fussed over me, taking my coat, guiding me to an armchair. You look nice, Cleo. That's a lovely dress. Thank you, Marcia. Darnell returned with my water and sat on the sofa opposite me. Marcia sat beside him. They were a united front. The intervention was about to begin. So, Mama, Darnell started, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, we were so glad you agreed to come. It shows you're willing to listen to reason. I'm always willing to listen, I said calmly. Good. That's good, he said, nodding. He took a sip of his whiskey. Look, we know Sunday was a little tense. We might not have handled it perfectly, but our hearts are in the right place. All we want is what's best for you. Marcia chimed in, her voice soft and earnest. We see you struggling, Cleo, and it breaks our hearts. We want to take that burden off your shoulders. The house, the bills, the cooking. It's too much for one person, especially when you're not feeling yourself. I let the silence sit for a moment before I spoke. And what is it exactly that you imagine my burdens to be? Darnell leaned forward. It's everything, Mama. It's the loneliness. It's the upkeep on a 4,000 square foot house. It's managing your finances, your pension and Social Security. It takes careful budgeting. We can help with that. We can make sure you're secure. He thinks that little pension is all she's got. The overheard phrase, which I now realize must have been a conversation with Marcia, echoed in my mind. The smallness of his vision was breathtaking. So you want to manage my pension for me, I stated, not as a question. Among other things, he said, waving a hand dismissively. It's a total wellness plan, Mama. Physical, financial, emotional. We've already got the guest room all set up for you. And we've spoken to a lawyer just to make sure we're doing everything by the book to protect you. A lawyer, I repeated, my voice neutral. I see. It's just a formality, Marcia added quickly, to make the transition smooth, so we can sell your house and invest the proceeds for your long-term care. It's all about planning for your future. There it was. The quiet part, said aloud. Sell my house, my home, Robert's home, the place where I had raised the man sitting in front of me, plotting to take it away. I looked at him. My son. His face was a mask of sincere concern, but his eyes were hard. They were the eyes of a salesman closing a difficult deal. He had a debt to pay, and I was the solution. Darnell, I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the silent room. You left your overcoat at my house the other day. He blinked, thrown by the change of subject. Oh, right, I was in a hurry. I hung it up for you, I continued. But there were some papers in the pocket. They were quite thick. I took them out so they wouldn't get creased. I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes. Marcia glanced at him, her smile tightening at the edges. Papers? Darnell said, trying to sound casual. Probably just some client contracts. Nothing important. I don't believe they were client contracts, I said. I reached into the large envelope I'd brought and pulled out the folded document. I placed it on the coffee table between us. The title was facing up, Petition for Appointment of Conservator. The color drained from Darnell's face. Marcia's hand flew to her mouth. The room was utterly still, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I believe this is yours, I said. Darnell stared at the paper as if it were a snake. He couldn't speak. You claim in this document, I went on, my voice level and clear, that my physician, Dr. David Yancey, recommended a cognitive evaluation. I spoke with him. He said that is a falsehood. He is prepared to testify to that under oath. Marcia made a small, wounded sound. Darnell's composure was cracking, his face a mixture of shock and dawning horror. He had been so sure of my weakness, so confident in my decline, that he never imagined I would simply pick up the phone and check his facts. Mama, it's a misunderstanding, he stammered, reaching for the document. Is it? I asked. I reached back into my envelope and pulled out the second paper. I unfolded it and placed it on top of the first. It was the wire confirmation from the bank. The long string of numbers was clearly visible under the lamplight. You also seem to be concerned about my ability to manage my finances, I said. You mentioned my pension. You're right, it does require careful budgeting. But I have other assets. For instance, the proceeds from the sale of my company, which was finalized on Monday morning. I let him read the number. I watched the comprehension dawn on his face, followed by a wave of disbelief and then a sickening, desperate greed. His eyes darted from the paper to my face and back again. $50 million. The number was so large, so far beyond his calculations, that it broke his reality. Marcia was staring at the paper, her mouth agape. Sale? What sale? Bank's linen? Yes, Marcia, Bank's Linen Services. I sold it to a national hospital systems conglomerate. The deal has been in the works for a year. My quiet days in the sunroom had not been spent fading away. They had been spent closing the deal of a lifetime. Darnell finally found his voice. It was a hoarse whisper. 50 million? That's correct, I said. I then reached into the envelope a final time and drew out the letter from Beverly Strode. I placed it on top of the bank statement. And this is a letter from my attorney. She has reviewed your petition. The letter explains in very precise legal terms the consequences you will face if you attempt to file it. It details the charges of fraud, perjury, and attempted elder financial abuse. She seems to believe we have a very strong case. I leaned back in my chair. I had said my piece. The papers on the table did the rest of the shouting. The silence that followed was the loudest I have ever heard. It was the sound of a world breaking. Darnell's carefully constructed narrative, his entire justification for his monstrous plan, had been dismantled in under 3 minutes with 3 pieces of paper. He stared at the stack on the table, his face ashen. He looked up at me, and for the first time he saw me. Not the grieving widow, not the dotty old mother, but the woman who had built an empire from scratch, the woman who held all the cards. Marcia began to cry, quiet, hiccuping sobs. It was not the sound of remorse. It was the sound of defeat. Darnell finally looked away from the papers and met my gaze. There was no apology in his eyes. There was only the raw, ugly truth of his ambition, now thwarted. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice raw. "About the sale?" "I wonder," I said softly. I stood up, my movement slow and deliberate. "Thank you for the water, Darnell. I think I'll be going now." I left the papers on the table. They were his problem now. I walked out of their house, not looking back, and closed the door quietly behind me. I did not go home. I went to a hotel downtown, one of my oldest clients, and took a suite overlooking the city. That night, for the first time in 6 months, I slept through the night. The next day, I called a locksmith and had the locks on my house changed. Beverly called in the afternoon. Darnell had called her, frantic, begging her to tell me it was all a misunderstanding. He had promised to destroy the petition. He had offered to do anything. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him to communicate with his mother through me, his legal adversary, from now on," she said. And then I hung up. I never saw the petition again. The conservatorship was abandoned. Darnell's clawback debt, I later learned from Camille, was over $1.3 million. It was now entirely his own problem to solve. He called me again and again. He left long, rambling messages. He sent pleading texts. Marcia sent a bouquet of funereal lilies with a card full of hollow apologies. I did not respond. The trust between a mother and child is not a thing that can be shattered and then glued back together. The cracks will always show. I did not stay in the house on Sugar Hill. It was Robert's and my house. My next chapter needed a place of its own. 2 weeks later, I bought the brownstone directly next door. It was smaller, but it had a beautiful garden and a sunroom that faced east to catch the morning light. I hired my own contractors, picked my own colors, and filled it with my own things. I still host Sunday dinners. Not for Darnell and Marcia, but for Beverly, and for Camille when she's in town, and for Dr. Yancey and his wife, and for the deacons' wives who used to stop by for my peach cobbler. My table is filled with the family I have chosen, the people who see me for who I am. Sometimes, from my new sunroom, I can see the house next door. My old house. Darnell still has his key to that one. I let him keep it. The house is empty now, a silent monument to a life that was. I lost a son that week. Or perhaps I only lost the illusion of one. He saw a liability to be managed while I was busy closing the biggest deal of my life. He was focused on his arithmetic, trying to figure out how to subtract my burdens from his life. He never thought to check my ledger.